Hello. Thank you for joining us, everyone, and good afternoon. My name is Jason Berwin. I'm ESA's Vice President of Policy. Thank you for attending today's webinar on FERC Order 841, a hot off-the-presses look at compliance plans and next steps. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available at energystorage.org. Participant lines will be muted throughout the webinar. However, we do welcome your questions and comments, which can be submitted at any time via the chat box on the left side of your screen. And just a note, we will be trying to take questions at the end of the webinar, but we welcome you to write them in real time as you think of them, and we will tag them. Following the webinar, you will receive a link to the recording and the slides, as well as a brief survey regarding today's topic and topics for future webinars. Your feedback will ensure that ESA continues to provide the highest value information to you and your company. Also, a reminder, all meetings and teleconferences of the Energy Storage Association are held in accordance with our antitrust guidelines. We ask that you abide by these guidelines during today's webinar. The full guidelines are available in the members-only area of the ESA website. I'm really pleased today to introduce to you a lineup of speakers who are real experts on RTO markets in Order 841. Those speakers are Mike Berlinski, Director of Emerging Technologies at Customized Energy Solutions, as well as the members of his team, Patrick Shoup, John Fernandez, and Chad Dixon, who will all be taking turns talking about the content. One other note before we get underway, I also want to let folks know to please save the date for February 13th of next year. That will be the next Energy Storage Policy Forum here in Washington, D.C. at the National Press Club, where all of the latest and greatest in energy storage policy is discussed. Last year, it was right before Order 841 was issued, and I think this year it will be a really deep and rich grist for discussion as what's going on in the markets following these 841 compliance plans. Finally, ESA does work to accelerate markets, connect members, and educate all stakeholders. Our members directly influence our educational programming, so if you would like to learn more about membership value add opportunities, please contact our membership manager, Richie O'Neill. His email address is on that slide. And thank you again for your attention. Without further ado, we will get underway. So I'm going to take just a couple of minutes very quickly for those of you who might be coming to this fresh to give you an extremely brief review of Order 841 and what we're talking about here. So Order 841 was issued by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission in February of this year, and so it applies to the 6 jurisdictional electric power market, wholesale regional electric power markets in the United States. That's PJM, New York ISO, ISO New England, MISO, SPP, and California ISO. So just a note to folks, that map there shows you the territory that covers. ERCOT in Texas is not subject to FERC jurisdiction, so there's no impact of 841 there. And the Western Energy Imbalance Market is not directly subject to FERC jurisdiction, although it is affected to the extent that the California ISO is doing anything in respect to Order 841. Really basically, at its heart, what Order 841 does is direct each of the RTOs to file amendments to their tariffs that establish a participation model for electric storage. There are 5 main sections to that order. They are summarized here on your screen, but we are going to be getting to a lot of details here. And certainly, I also remind those of you who are ESA members that our previous webinars that dive into and analyze all of what's in Order 841 back from March and April of this past year are available on ESA's website. Compliance filings went in this Monday, December 3rd, just 2 days ago. And as of now, implementation is directed to be completed by this time next year. Key thing for folks who are coming to this from different parts of the storage industry, electric storage is the term of use here, and that's critical because what's happening is focused on things that are electrons in, electrons out. So that includes non-battery technologies like pumped hydro or flywheels, but that does exclude storage that's delivering energy as heating or cooling service. That would be participating as demand response. Another thing to note is that it does not differentiate location on the grid. That is to say, the definition of electric storage can refer to an asset connected at transmission, at distribution, or behind a customer meter. I do note that non-exporting energy storage in a customer meter would be participating again as demand response and not contemplated in Order 841. At heart, what this all means for you, folks in the energy storage industry who are looking at markets and the opportunities there, is one, this is clarifying and regularizing the way in which energy storage is going to participate in wholesale markets. And we expect that that clarity and certainty is going to serve as a better foundation for you all to plan and develop projects, have greater certainty about the investment and the risks involved, and that is a key enabling piece. More to the point, this is laying a foundation, we believe, for greater flexibility in general in wholesale market operations, and certainly, as many of you are aware, ESA is going to be, in the years to come, following on with efforts to update market products and rules that may not specifically be about storage, but which can take advantage of the foundation of flexibility that 841 puts forth. Finally, just to note, the key thing also is that the storage industry is now at the table in the RTOs. I'd like to note to many of you who are ESA members that ESA has participated either directly or through representatives in all stakeholder meetings pertaining to Order 841 that happened in the latter half of this year at PJM, New York ISO, ISO New England MISO, and at SPT. And we are well positioned to continue that participation in forming and shaping market rules and processes to come with your support and input. So thanks to those members who are there. Without further ado, I will then turn over the microphone now to the Customized Energy Solutions team and take it away. Mike Berlinski.
Great, thanks Jason. Hi all. So I first just wanted to give folks an understanding of why we think we're qualified to join this webinar. Customized Energy Solutions is a consulting firm. We're celebrating our 20th anniversary this year. As you can see on the right, we do a lot of different things, really help people understand energy markets. All of us speakers on this webinar are part of the Emerging Technologies team, where we help clients understand market opportunities for energy storage. We've been supporting ESA for a long time and very happy to continue that support. So we're very happy to be here. The first piece I wanted to share was just our very quick initial opinion on where the RTOs and ISOs stand in terms of complying with the letter and the spirit of the Order 841. So you see here a color-coded table with each ISO in the columns and the main parts of the order in the rows, and the letters and numbers correspond to those specific sections of the order for ease of reference when relevant. You see it's ultimately going to be binary, either one is in compliance or not. So there's a lot of green. We do think a lot of ISOs have met the compliance requirements, as well as some red cells, some areas where we believe they are not in compliance, and we'll get to those details later in each regional section. As well as you'll note a lot of yellow, and that really signifies that either we're not sure, we need more time to really understand what the ISO is presenting, we need to compare the tariff language in addition to the transmittal letter, and we really need to understand what the ISO is getting at when they put this proposal forth. So that's our quick assessment. And we do expect these colors to change over time, and we have a certain comment period to make the ultimate case before FERC. So I wanted to just highlight some commonalities that we observed after reviewing all of the ISO filings. The first one, I would say ironically, is that each ISO's market design is different, so that's the first commonality. And I think the main reason is because the ISOs are building frameworks, and while they're trying to achieve compliance with the same order, they're all being built on different foundations. And we've observed each ISO is subject to and limited by its legacy systems. And that's one of the main reasons you'll see differences in each ISO's 841 compliant market design. And there are pros and cons that go along with each one. Again, we'll get into detail in the following sections. So as you note from the color-coded dashboard, we believe most ISOs are leaving some required pieces out. There are a number of ISOs that are missing some key parameter or feature or functionality, or are including some limitations, limiting the operations, the flexibility, which ultimately will limit the economics, profitability of storage resources. I would say that there is a tension and a trade-off between the rules being very specific and dictating exactly what can and can't be done, and on the other hand, flexibility for asset owners to optimize their resource, and there may be some benefits in ambiguity of the letter of some tariff provisions. So I think we'll have to negotiate that as we go through responding to these filings. One example is market monitor thresholds, where it could be a negative if it's not clear what market monitors will allow, but I also think it can be a positive if there is a lot of flexibility offered asset owners to make bids and try to optimize their resource. Next, I would say that in the past, storage technologies were running into a limitation based on the regulations. The rules either explicitly said you can't do that, or they didn't make it clear that you can do something, even though the technology was capable of it. Now I think we've moved beyond that. 841 really helps us accomplish that, but now we're running up against limitations of what the software can do. And one place we're seeing that is in the day-ahead and real-time market functionality, whether ISOs offer commitment specifically for storage resources or not, and the amount of optionality that an asset owner has. Some examples I would give is what I would call the clunkiness of having markets that are set and run every hour, and you can only provide certain information or have your preferences assessed on an hourly basis. Also, some ISOs have a 60-minute or 15-minute cycle to either determining commitment or setting dispatch. And that is a relatively long time compared to the sub-second response capabilities of many storage technologies. Also, some ISOs have said that their solve time would get too long if they were to take into account all of the parameters and flexibility that are necessary to really accommodate all of the storage resource capabilities. So those are some of the types of limitations that we're starting to run up against now that the regulations have been leveled. And then last, we've been observing the frontiers of what Order 841 is clear on and improves. I noted here distributed energy resources and behind-the-meter storage resources as one example. I think we can expand that to other areas such as hybrid resources, where there's lots of issues that have been discussed in the ISO stakeholder processes. Some of these frontiers are being explored and established in some of the pieces of the 841 filings, but there are still a lot of areas where many stakeholders would say a lot more work is necessary. So next we'll go on to ISO by ISO assessment of the compliance filings. And I'll start with California. Really just to give quickly, California probably was closest to already being in full compliance. They had a number of participation models for pump storage resources, for non-generator resources, NGRs, and proxy demand response proxy demand resources, PDRs. So they only had a few changes to make. They did propose those two changes to lower the minimum size and exempt storage charging energy from transmission charges. So it seems like now they will be fully in compliance, and they did request an effective date of December 3rd, 2019, as per the order. So California looks good to go from our initial assessment.
Hey, and Mike, this is Jason.
Yeah.
One quick thing I wanted to add. Certainly folks in CAISO were thinking about how transmission charges apply because I think that they were concerned they were being asked in some respects to go backwards. Do you know what, if anything, they've done about that in their filing, or they really have just kept the letter of 841?
Right, good question. I have not heard of any backtracking there, but I'm not sure, but that's definitely a good thing for folks to be on the lookout for.
Thanks, Mike.
Okay, I'll turn it over to my colleague Chad to cover PJM.
Thanks, Mike, and hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. So in PJM, we have two separate filings. The first is for energy storage resource accounting proposal. This first proposal is basically the establishment of a new accounting system wherein PJM is planning on separating charging categories into dispatch charging energy, non-dispatch charging energy, and load-serving energy charging. We'll go into more detail in a few slides. This first proposal has an earlier effective date of February 3rd. This is the date that PJM requested of FERC. This will allow PJM to test its proposed metering and accounting methodology for their new charging categories. So there are separate and distinct transmission charges and energy charges associated with these categories that could have material implications for storage assets. The second portion of the filing is the Energy Storage Resource Markets and Operations proposal. So PJM was already largely in compliance with Order 841. However, they have some new features and have some helpful clarifications on existing rules for storage assets. So PJM already allows storage assets to participate in most markets, and these resources do have some mechanisms to manage their state of charge and regulation, but again, we'll get into a little bit more of those new features in the next slide. PJM did defer many of the important details on the implementation to the implementation development. So some of these include manual changes, some cost offer development, definition of dispatch charging energy, which we'll also get into later, and metering and reporting requirements for the ESR accounting proposal. So both of these combined proposals constitute the energy storage resource participation model outlined in FERC Order 841. So some of the new features of PJM's energy storage participation model. PJM has expanded the definition of energy storage resource and capacity storage resource to include all storage technologies. So now the tariff will explicitly include all technologies capable, as Jason mentioned earlier, of storing electricity for later injection. PJM has also introduced operating modes for energy market participation. The one that's most relevant for battery storage resources is the continuous operation mode, wherein you will be able to submit one offer curve for charge and discharge, which will prevent conflicting energy schedules. Charge and discharge modes are also available, but will most likely be used exclusively for hydro units. PJM has also added the charging cost into the ESR cost offer. So they have outlined some initial indications that these charging costs will be included. However, the tariff language, is still outstanding. Another development is the storage will now be able to provide all reserve products. So storage resources could provide mostly all reserve products already, but the ESR participation model ensures that storage resources will be eligible for make-whole payments. So that's really the new development there. And the only other development for the reserve products is that ESRs will now be able to offer into the sync reserve market without an energy offer. And then again, as I mentioned before, there's a new accounting method for energy charging that PJM has proposed separately in the first proposal that becomes effective February 3rd. There are many new pieces to this proposal, and it does seem equitable upon first glance, but as I'll mention in the next slide, we're waiting on a pretty significant distinction related to this proposal. And these are the reasons why price for energy charging is in yellow in the ISO compliance deadline, because we're really still digesting this proposal. So I'll go into some of the issues that we see. Obviously, the main issue here is the 10-hour capacity duration requirement. So obviously, this is an unfortunate development. However, it's my understanding that the industry plans to fight this. So that's good. Obviously, PJM did submit a supporting affidavit from the capacity market operations manager in addition to the proposal, and some of the language that's used from the tariff as justification there is a little leeway we see. Another issue is the lack of clarity on the day-ahead must-offer requirements for capacity storage resources. In the manuals, it states that the resource, their offer may vary from hour to hour. However, it's not exactly clear what this means and what will be considered withholding versus what will not be considered withholding for the day-ahead must-offer requirement. In initial conversations with IMM, they stated that you will need to offer in the clear capacity amount into the day-ahead energy market for at least 10 hours. These hours don't have to be contiguous, and there's no specific hours in which you must offer. However, it should be noted that these conversations are obviously not the law, and the tariff and the manuals are really the quote-unquote law, and those are really what's unclear here. So, and just in the sake of time moving on, so the next issue that we see is the lack of stated charge parameters. So PJM is not planning to implement the FERC-mandated stated charge parameters, including starting period state of charge, minimum state of charge limit, and maximum state of charge limit. So these parameters, we feel, would do a lot to prevent infeasible schedules in the day-ahead market, and they could also prevent the expedited degradation of storage assets offering wholesale services. The new charging energy terms and conditions, as I mentioned, will need to be reviewed further, but really what's at issue here, I believe, is the definition of what is dispatched and what's non-dispatched charging energy. Mainly, is self-scheduling considered dispatched charging energy? So that's still outstanding. And then upon first glance, it looks like PJM may force you to arrange transmission service if you are considered non-dispatched charging energy. But again, more detail on this issue will become available upon implementation development. The last issue that I see is that the day-ahead optimization for hydro is available for hydro but not for batteries. Quickly, PJM alludes to the day-ahead optimization in the filing. However, they claim that this was built for hydro units that cannot start and stop as quickly as batteries, and therefore it's not scalable to battery resources. And there have been a few mixed feelings about this exclusion. If it could be useful for battery storage assets, it may be worth it to request access. If it will not help battery storage operate in the day-ahead energy market because of its limitations, it may not be worth it to request access to this. So the timeline for PJM's 841 filing, the first portion, the energy accounting proposal, as I mentioned, PJM has requested this to become effective February 3rd, and it will allow them to test their metering and accounting practices on existing assets. And then the market and operations proposal, PJM requested FERC to order on this proposal by May 30th in order to have sufficient time to develop the required software. And as other ISOs, PJM has requested a December 3rd, 2019 implementation date. And now I'll pass it over to Patrick to cover NYISO.
Okay, thank you, Chad. Appreciate that, and thank you everyone for joining. Happy to be here with you today. So starting off on the NYISO overview, NYISO is creating an entirely new energy storage resource type for its Order 841 compliance plan. This adds 2 existing storage types and does not necessarily replace existing ones like the limited energy storage resource and the energy limited resource, which are both additional options for storage to use in the NYISO market. This new energy storage resource adds many of those features that were required or recommended in the FERC's order. Also, New York ISO is including a ISO managed energy level option where they will actually look at your resource and determine when it should be scheduled and dispatched in day-ahead and real-time markets. Again, that is optional for most cases, with the exception of capacity, which I will talk about in a moment. They included many new parameters for energy storage in this ESR resource type. And then they did make changes that allow you to submit bid curves from full injection to full withdrawal, and these are evaluated intra-hour, so resources can go between charging and discharging multiple times based on what their economics and bid curves look like. NYISO also lowered the minimum size to 100 kilowatts just for this ESR resource type. Previously, they had had a 1 megawatt limit for most other types of energy storage, and that limit will remain for those pre-existing storage models. So just the ESR is being lowered to 100 kilowatts. There are still multiple issues and areas that we think that NYISO is out of compliance, and we expect implementation to be delayed potentially as much as 6 months due to software issues, which I'll get into a little bit more in a moment. So starting with the issues that I see that actually run afoul of 841 and are probably not compliant with the order itself. The ESR model does not work for non-continuous storage. So what this means is that NYISO has created a dispatch-only resource type that only works for resources like batteries that can seamlessly transition between charging and discharging. An example of a type of resource that cannot do that would be pumped hydro, but there are other types of energy storage technologies that also cannot seamlessly switch between charging and discharging. Due to software limitations, they have scrapped plans for non-continuous storage resources to be able to qualify as ESRs. Instead, they will use the pump storage model, or NYISO has said they may approach the ISO and suggest other types of participation options. Additionally, we see a problem where the ISO is requiring capacity resources that use the ESR model to use ISO managed energy levels in the day-ahead market. So as I mentioned, the ISO has created this new option for the energy level and optimization to be done by the ISO. They are going to require it for anyone that is in the capacity market for their day-ahead market participation. And This basically means that you can't manage your own state of charge in day-ahead markets, and you can self-manage your state of charge in real-time markets, but there are some drawbacks if you do that. I won't go into the details of that, but they affect how much availability you have in future calculations of your capacity availability. Additionally, the 841 tariffs are only applicable to resources that solely stay in the wholesale market. What this means is that NYISO is currently not allowing dual participation in wholesale and utility or other types of programs. So if you are going to use the ESR type, at this time you will not be allowed to do anything with a utility program or any other type of outside service. You have to be in the wholesale market only all the time. This is being worked on. There is a draft proposal that NYISO has put forward for dual participation, but the details are very scant and a lot more work will need to be done. We wouldn't expect any significant rules to be set up for this type of dual participation for another 2 or 3 years. Additionally, behind the meter resources will need to be sub-metered to be part of the ESR program, which can be a good thing or a bad thing depending on your particular perspective and position. There also are some potential risks of non-compliance regarding the parameters that NYISO has decided to include or exclude with their filing. They have removed the option for having a min-max charge time or runtime. Again, that has to do with software constraints. This was slowing down their solution process. And in addition, the state of charge parameter, which can be entered by a market participant in the day-ahead market, is only allowed to be telemetered in real time. Therefore, you cannot add it to your real-time bids. NYISO will determine what your state of charge is through their telemetry and apply that to your participation. And then finally, upper and lower storage limits, so the physical characteristics of the resource, can only be set during asset registration, which isn't necessarily a violation of 841, but is something that the industry would like more flexibility on. So beyond the issues directly related to 841 compliance, there are some other challenges with the NYISO design. So one major issue is that the duration requirement for capacity participation might be changing. So 841 does list 4 hours as the minimum duration for full capacity value. That is what it currently sits at the ISO, but there's an active stakeholder initiative to review a study that NYISO has conducted, as well as some proposals they have come up with that could extend that from 4 hours to 8 hours. This is going to eventually be decided probably early next year. So it could be that they file this 4-hour limit and then change it in a couple of months and then implement that a year or 2 later. So that creates a significant amount of uncertainty and is a problem for the industry at large. Additionally, NYISO does plan to allow ESRs to aggregate together to reach that minimum 100 kilowatt size. They have started the process of reviewing those rules, but they have not set anything yet, and implementation would probably not be until 2021 or later. There also are some challenges with the economics in the ISO managed energy levels. So the ISO is looking at your bid spread to determine margins when they schedule you using the ISO management. What this means, though, is that you might be dispatched in uneconomic ways, and because of the limited look-ahead window in real time, your real-time economics might not match your day-ahead economics, and you could be scheduled uneconomically or out of merit. And then combined with some of the restrictions on make-whole payments and cost guarantees, the economics for energy storage might be worse when combined with this ISO management option. And then finally, there are some questions about whether market mitigation will be a barrier to entry. Market mitigation is particularly relevant for mitigated capacity zones where buyer-side mitigation applies. This is places like New York City. Their resources might be determined to be subject to mitigation tests and would have to have some offer floors and caps imposed on charging and discharging. Opportunity cost calculations that go into that could be unfavorable. We need to review and look into this a little bit more to determine exactly what kind of risks this entails. So then finally going on to the ISO timeline for implementation. NYISO is the only ISO that is requesting an extension. They say that they would not be able to implement this any earlier than May 1st, 2020. Again, that is due to software issues. So this is a recurring theme. They can't do a lot of things because they say that their software is not going to be upgraded in time and or is not able to handle certain features. So they are in the midst of an energy management system upgrade at the ISO, and that has gone way over their initial schedule and pushing everything back that requires significant new software implementation, such as the ESR model. The only thing that is going to be implemented sooner is the buyer side mitigation for smaller resources, so under 2 megawatts. That would be implemented much more rapidly. And then there's future work on items like aggregation, dual participation, hybrid resources, and DERs that are coming later, probably implementation in 2021 or later, and there is no timeline for applying ESR rules to non-continuous resources. So that might just be something that NYISO does not work on unless they are forced to by FERC and or other pressure. So that wraps up New York ISO. Next up, we have MISO. So I'll turn it over to my colleague, John Fernandez, to take us through there.
All right, Patrick, thank you very much.
And John, this is Jason. Just wanted to cut in and just say, hope folks are enjoying this. Obviously a lot of details here, and we're going to try to speed up ever so slightly so we can make sure there's good time for Q&A.
Yeah, Jason, message received, not a problem. And I think starting with PJM, New York, places that have had already some penetration of storage, some more complex market structures even before 841 took a little extra time. So I will be sure to be mindful of that. So good afternoon, everyone. Just to echo the appreciation for the ability to present to you today and for your participation. So overview, hopefully folks are seeing the slides okay. Overview of MISO's 841 compliance filing. MISO does come right out and confirms the participation model includes all storage types, specifically carving out pumped hydro, flywheels, batteries, transmission and distribution interconnected resources. And if you skip down to that second to last main bullet, adopting all terms and definitions required by 841. MISO has been pretty upfront with that from the get-go. Their straw proposal was quite robust, and that was reflected in their compliance filing. Commitment status, it was good to see a definition of commitment status, how it will apply to storage, but it's not just the ability to provide a service, but provide a service over a specified time period. MISO also confirms non-market services, black start, and reactive supply and voltage control. Storage will just have to be qualified specifically as those types of generators to provide the service. The one point I wanted to provide some focus on was the commitment status categories. MISO has come out and has expanded this. They started out charge, discharge, continuous, and offline. MISO subsequently abandoned offline mode and added available, not participating, bidirectional emergency modes, and then an outage mode. I think MISO really picked up on the feedback from the industry that market participation of storage is not simply going to be offering straightforward capacity, energy, ancillary services. The business models are going to be complex. The price thresholds are also going to be complex, as well as moving targets. And I think these operating modes really could be industry best practices as far as the ability for an asset owner, a market participant, to signal the market as far as what they are doing at that time, what the economic priorities are. A few uncertainties out there. Really the biggest one has to do with small storage, distributed storage, and especially customer-sited behind-the-meter storage. MISO did come out with a pro forma agreement for distributed storage that really respects state jurisdiction. When you look at markets like MISO and SPP, these are vertically integrated states, unlike the deregulated markets of the East. So very different relationships with the states. MISO is still asking for a phased approach of what they call very small storage. There was not an allowance in Order 841 for this. So for the distributed interests participating today, we will be pursuing that further, seeing how FERC is going to handle that proposal from MISO. Transmission charge exclusions, MISO read very specifically into Order 841 that exclusions for the transmission bill you get for charging energy is only available when you're providing a service. MISO reads that strictly as regulating reserves. We find that to be somewhat restricting, especially compared to what other ISOs are doing. So it's something else that has caught our attention. And market monitoring, especially for me, some of you have heard me speak up in stakeholder meetings along the way, really curious to see how the market monitors are going to treat mitigation, withholding. I do find it interesting that MISO has put it in writing that market mitigation is only going to apply to resources 2 megawatts and above. I find that to be very unique, perhaps somewhat even unprecedented. Filing timeline, no delay in the compliance plan. MISO has said that compliance will go into effect December of 2019, but that new registrations will be modeled in March of 2020. So what we're going to pursue with staff is if assets are ready to operate under the formal participation model before that March deadline, will they be able to? That's an outstanding question. And then just for folks that have been in the MISO market for some time, it has been put in writing that the stored energy resource Type 2 market product will be phased out at that March 2020 transition date. So I will leave it at that for MISO, and we will now transition over to ISO New England.
Great, thanks. Mike Berlinski here again. So New England filing is pretty simple on top of the existing rules, where I'd note storage has to register as both a generator and a load. New England recently filed a big package called Enhanced Storage Participation that really got them most of the way towards compliance. So they made 3 very specific additional changes in their 841 filing, made rules technology neutral, lowered the minimum size to 100 kilowatts, and exempted the charging energy from transmission charges. There's a number of issues that we flag. The main one is the automatic derating of megawatt limits. That was the subject of an ESA comment in the ESP filing, so I won't go into that now. I will note New England is lacking a stated charge parameter, and as I said, the requirement to register as both a generator and as a load is unique among ISOs. Separately, there are some issues that I have question marks on and raise a flag just for the industry to really come together and discuss. So I won't itemize them here, but just say we would all benefit from further conversation on these issues. And New England has requested a standard implementation date with one other provision, a much later implementation date. And we can get into any details offline. So that's the quick look at New England, and I'll turn it back over to my colleague John for SPP.
Okay, thanks, Mike. So when Order 841 came out, the Southwest Power Pool was up to its neck in the expansion of the market into the Mountain West region. So one might say staff got a bit of a late start when it came to their straw proposal for compliance, but I think they did an excellent job in catching up, processing stakeholder feedback, and coming forward with what I would call a straightforward compliance filing, but really hitting all the marks for the most part that FERC was asking for in Order 841. SPP will maintain 2 storage types. The market storage resource, MSR, is the new product type. That will be under the rules of Order 841. They will be keeping the ESR in place, primarily for an asset like pumped hydro that can't go up and down, crossing what SPP has said, that 0 threshold, at least in any sort of continuous operating mode. One thing to really tip the hat to SPP on, SPP has determined that any time they are dispatching a storage resource in charging mode, it is to the benefit of the market. It is offering a service to the market, and so there will be exemptions from that transmission bill that I cited in the MISO section. SPP is also allowing the asset owner to tell them what the round-trip efficiency effectively is for a storage resource. So really relying and allowing market participants to inform SPP on what the parameters are for their assets. So I think those are the key highlights of the compliance filing. In terms of things we're keeping an eye on, the biggest one is capacity accreditation, and this has been a major blind spot throughout the stakeholder process. Since SPP does not have a formal capacity market, they really kept accreditation out of the 841 compliance conversations. We had a number of both public and private discussions with staff about this, and to SPP's credit, they have put it in writing in their compliance filing that the current rules as they stand do not preclude storage from qualifying for the resource adequacy construct that does exist in the Southwest Power Pool. There are a lot of details to be worked out. I don't know what qualification exactly is going to look like, but we have at least checked the box with SPP that storage does qualify. That was a big step. I think that's really the biggest one there. Similar market monitoring concerns as I expressed in MISO. So I think that pretty much covers the important points for SPP. As far as the timeline, again, very straightforward, December 2019 implementation. SPP staff has noted the significant operational and technical system overhaul that this requires. They are not leveraging that to delay implementation, but they have mentioned that asking FERC for a very fast March 1st, 2019 approval deadline. So I will leave it at that with the lightning round. Jason, I believe I'm turning it back over to you.
And I will finish very quickly for folks so we can get to Q&A. Just so folks are aware, ESA and allied organizations have requested a 45-day extension at FERC to respond to the various plans that have been filed. So that would, if granted, land us at, I believe, February 3rd. And we are going to be waiting to hear back from FERC on those requests for extensions. Hopefully sometime during the week of December 10th, we will get an answer from FERC if they're going to grant that extension. If not, comments are due December 24th, which is very fast. And just so folks are aware, we are certainly going to be working with member companies and particularly leadership circle companies to hone our responses, really emphasizing the maximal flexible utilization of storage and access to revenue streams for market participants. Folks should also be aware there are outstanding requests for rehearing, that is, stakeholders asking FERC to reconsider Order 841 or parts thereof. Most of those requests focus on the requirements in Order 841 for RTOs to enable DER storage market participation. I note FERC declined to rule on those rehearing requests before these compliance filings went in, so we will wait to see what, if anything, FERC says on this. And just so folks are keeping track, this is not over even once those tariffs are accepted by FERC. Implementation means updating business practice manuals, implementing software, so there'll be plenty of opportunities to come in terms of engaging on this. And certainly ESA has its priorities, not only in 841, but using this as a follow-on to continue working to advance market opportunities for storage in wholesale electric markets. But at this point, I would be pleased to now turn to the questions that folks have been asking. I'll try to gather together, because I know there are a bunch of different questions, sort of things that are similarly themed for the CES crew. Guys, here's a question that's been coming up. Folks are sort of asking about capacity in different places. Some questions about the PJM 10-hour capacity duration requirement. Is that a hard requirement, or can you derate? Another question, what are the minimum duration requirements across the ISOs, and do they have the same derating approaches or different? What do you guys have on that?
Yeah, this is Mike. I'll start. So each ISO has a specific hour duration requirement to qualify to provide capacity. It goes from 10 hours in PJM to 2 hours in New England, and you can derate to meet that, which is a requirement of Order 841. I will note that there's other nuances and intricacies around that, but that I think is the main response.
Got it. And just, I'll follow on that. John, you were talking about capacity qualification for resource adequacy purposes in SPP and MISO. Any idea on durations there?
Right now, I feel pretty confident that MISO is going to stick with a 4-hour duration requirement. SPP, really for all resources, but even specifically for storage, we began the discussions with the 4-hour requirement. Market participants and staff felt comfortable with that moving on, but that is not set in stone, could be adjusted really in either direction. Even MISO has alluded to the benefit of storage at less than 4 hours. Both MISO and SPP have confirmed that storage can derate to meet any duration requirement, so that is in place.
Thanks. And Mike, did you say what ISO New England had for duration?
Yep, 2 hours for front-of-meter storage in New England, and if John didn't mention it, 4 hours for New York existing also.
Great. Speaking of New York, we had a couple of questions here about dual participation limits in New York ISO. One person asking, why is New York ISO doing this? Another is saying, does that dual participation limitation also apply to peak shaving or non-programmatic use cases, or does it only prohibit participation in utility programs, e.g. demand response?
Yeah, this is Patrick. I'll take that. So to the first point, why are they doing this? It's because they see it as a system reliability issue if they have resources that are not available to the wholesale market part of the time. So they do want to determine the rules for dual participation, and I should also mention there's a lot of work going on the distributed energy resource side that would be looking at similar issues. But what they have said for the ESR filing is until they determine the rules that will apply to dual participation resources, they are going to make it a blanket prohibition. Now, what does that actually mean? It appears that NYISO is taking the strictest possible look at it. So if you are going to want to be an ESR in the wholesale market, you are not allowed to do any services to a utility or be on a retail tariff or use the value of DER tariff that the New York State Utilities has recently filed. So you can't do any of that until they figure out the rules. Their draft proposal was only maybe 3 or 4 slides long, had almost 0 details, but essentially said that for all your obligations outside of the wholesale market, you would have to meet them by scheduling into the ISO. So still not a very good proposal. And again, this would only apply probably in the 2021 timeframe. So until that time, their proposal is you simply cannot do something outside of the wholesale market.
Great, thank you for that, Patrick. Another question, sort of set of questions. I think there are folks who are asking about DER storage participation. These are sort of a range of questions here. Some folks asking, does 100 kilowatts allow for aggregations, or is that just single units have to be 100 kilowatts? Some folks asking, what about, wasn't there something about aggregated distributed resources participation? What happened to that? Some other folks asking regarding the rehearing requests on DER storage participation, are folks referring to only behind the meter or also front of meter distribution connected? I think there's a lot of questions of folks in just how are distribution storage going to be participating. I don't know if y'all want to add some color to that.
This is Mike. I'll start just saying that it's different in each place. Some ISOs did put the minimum size 100 kilowatts on the resource type, storage resource. Some put it on the requirement to provide a service, capacity down to 100 kilowatts. Aggregation rules also differ region to region. I'll let others add anything they want.
Yeah, Mike, it's John. I'll jump in. both MISO and SPP, it appears, have put that 100 kilowatt tag on an individual resource. We've already expressed some concern about MISO dragging its feet, so to speak, on allowances for distributed customer-sited storage. SPP did revise their existing aggregation rules to include ESRs, to include storage. Haven't gotten into the details of those yet, but that is the one market where I have seen the ISO formally include aggregation into its 841 compliance. I think a lot of the markets are waiting to see FERC take further action on their DER discussions that are sitting out there. So for the most part, I would say that we've seen compliance plans focused on standalone single assets.
And this is Patrick. I would add to that for New York, there are plans to allow aggregations up to 100 kilowatts to be operated as an ESR. Those plans are not part of this filing. They are going to be set later.
Great. Thank you, gentlemen. There are a number of other questions pending, and unfortunately, we are at the end of the hour. I think that I'll circle back with the team at CES on whether we can answer some of these in writing, but I also encourage folks to reach out to the team at CES and stay abreast of what we're doing here at ESA. Again, as a reminder, we are going to be putting together our comments, which at present are due December 24th, unless FERC grants an extension, as we have requested, to February 3rd. Before we go, I just want to ask folks to please consider joining us for tomorrow's members-only webinar as well. The U.S. Energy Storage Monitor fourth quarter summary. That is tomorrow, December 6th, beginning at 4 p.m. Eastern. Delivered quarterly, the U.S. Energy Storage Monitor provides the industry's only comprehensive research on energy storage markets, deployments, policies, regulations, and financing in the U.S. These in-depth reports provide energy industry professionals, policymakers, government agencies, and financiers with consistent, actionable insight into the burgeoning U.S. energy storage market. So please join us tomorrow. And if you have any questions regarding the upcoming events or webinars, or would like to submit an idea for a future webinar, certainly please email to us at education@energystorage.org. But thank you again to our presenters at Customized Energy Solutions, Mike, Chad, Patrick, and John. And thank you all today for joining us in this important conversation. Please enjoy the rest of your day. Take care, everyone.